My name is Hana Kim. I'm 35. And you think you can just stroll back into our lives after leaving mom alone when she needed you most? My younger brother, June Park, his voice sharp and accusing, cut through the tense air of the sterile meeting room at Hope Valley Hospital. Our mother was fighting for her life in the ICU after a brutal hit and run. Here we were, seated stiffly around a polished table with Dr. Chen to discuss her critical care options. June, please, I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside, trying to preserve the calm I'd held onto for 15 years. Don't tell me to calm down, June snapped, slamming his fist on the table, causing the neatly stacked medical files to quiver. You vanished for over a decade, Hana. Mom spent nights sobbing, wondering if her eldest daughter was even alive, and now you show up looking like that. I glanced at my plain navy blazer and slacks, deliberately understated, the way I dressed when I wasn't standing before a judge. My brother-in-law, Minho Lee, smirked from his seat beside June. He's got a point, Hana. That outfit screams bargain bin. What kind of life have you been living? Mom always said you'd crash and burn. The familiar sting of their words settled deep in my chest. They had no clue where I'd been, what I'd done, or why I'd stayed away for 15 years. No idea that some wars demand everything. Your time, your identity, even your family. Dr. Chen adjusted his glasses, clearly uneasy. Perhaps we should focus on your mother's condition. She needs immediate surgery, but it's extremely risky. A decision must be made. I'll decide, June cut in, his tone final. I've been here, taking care of her, while Hana was off doing who knows what. Minho leaned forward, his smile cold. Actually, we've been wondering if you were locked up somewhere. It'd explain the long silence, the cheap clothes, the way you dodge questions about your work. The accusation hit like a slap. Prison. They thought I'd been in prison. Probably got tangled in some shady business, June added, his voice thick with disdain. Look at her, Minho. She's got that worn-out look, like someone who's been through the ringer. Maybe homeless. Maybe unhinged. I sat still, letting their assumptions crash over me like waves. They weren't entirely wrong. I had been through a kind of hell, just not the one they pictured. Dr. Chen cleared his throat again, his discomfort palpable. I really think we should return to Mrs. Kim's medical needs. You don't get it, doctor, Minho interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. Hana isn't fit to make these calls. She's been checked out of reality for too long, probably unstable. You can tell just by looking at her. June leaned closer, his voice slipping into that patronizing lilt he'd mastered as a kid. Hana, where have you even been? Are you getting help? Because you look rough, really rough. The irony burned. For 15 years, I'd fought battles they couldn't fathom in courtrooms they'd never step foot in, facing criminals whose names would send chills down their spines. I'd locked up serial killers, dismantled international trafficking rings, and prosecuted cases that dominated global headlines. And they thought I was a drifter, maybe a junkie. Maybe we should get social services involved, Minho suggested, his eyes narrowing. Have her checked out before she's allowed anywhere near Mom's decisions. Just then, my phone vibrated. Not my everyday phone, but the secure one. The one that only buzzed when the stakes were sky high. I glanced at the screen. District Attorney Emergency Line. I need to take this, I said, keeping my voice even. Of course you do, June scoffed, rolling his eyes. Probably your bookie or something. I stepped into the hallway, my pulse quickening as I answered. Kim here. Hana, thank God, the voice on the other end said, urgent and clipped. The Takeda case just blew up. The federal judge wants you in chambers in 90 minutes. The defense is alleging prosecutorial misconduct, and Judge Nakamura specifically asked for you by name. I closed my eyes, the weight of the case that had consumed 5 years of my life pressing down on me. Hiroshi Takeda, kingpin of the most dangerous syndicate on the West Coast. The Takeda case had forced me to live under aliases, sever all ties with my family for their own protection, and become a shadow of myself. I'll be there, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside. And Hana, the voice on the line added, the Attorney General reached out. She's putting your name forward for the federal prosecutor role in the Northern District. Congratulations, I ended the call and stood in the hallway, the sterile hospital air pressing against me as I tried to bridge the chasm between the two lives crashing together. In that room, I was Hannah the failure, the suspected drifter, the family disgrace. Out here, I was Hannah Kim, lead district attorney, the prosecutor who'd just been tapped for one of the most coveted roles in federal law enforcement. When I stepped back into the meeting room, June and Minho were huddled with Dr. Chen, their voices low and conspiratorial. "We were just telling the doctor you're not fit to make decisions for Mom," June said, his tone coated in fake concern. "Given your situation." "My situation?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, though the weight of their assumptions pressed harder. Minho nodded, his expression smug. "Your obvious instability, your shady past, your complete detachment from reality." Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. "Miss Kim, perhaps there's another family member who could—" The conference room door swung open, cutting him off. A young woman in a crisp suit stepped in, and I recognized her instantly. Assistant District Attorney Soo-Jin Park from my office. "Excuse me," she said, her gaze sweeping the room until it locked onto me. "I'm looking for District Attorney Kim." The room fell silent, the air heavy with shock. June's face drained of color. "District Attorney?" he whispered, barely audible. Soo-Jin, unaware of the family tension, pressed on. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Judge Nakamura pushed the hearing forward. We need you at the federal courthouse now. The Takeda defense team is claiming you lack jurisdiction to prosecute." She let out a sharp laugh, the sound slicing through the stunned quiet, as if anyone doubts Hannah Kim's authority. "You've taken down some of the most notorious crime syndicates in the country." Minho's jaw worked soundlessly, like a man struggling to process the impossible. Soo-Jin glanced at her phone, continuing, "Oh, and the FBI wants to sync with your office on the Kuroda Syndicate investigation. Agent Martinez said your approved surveillance ops led to 15 new arrests." June's grip tightened on the table, his knuckles paling. "Surveillance ops?" he muttered, disbelief etched into every syllable. "And congratulations on the federal nomination," Soo-Jin added with a warm smile. "Northern District Federal Prosecutor. It's about time, ma'am. Well-earned 15 years of convictions, and I'd never lost a high-profile case." I watched June's face as the truth sank in, his eyes widening with the realization. 15 years, not spent in jail, not wandering the streets, not battling some imagined addiction. 15 years, forging a career that had just hit its peak. "I'll be there, Soo-Jin," I said, my voice calm despite the storm of emotions. As she left, the silence in the room stretched tight, like a rope about to fray. Dr. Chen stared at me with dawning recognition. You're District Attorney Hannah Kim, aren't you? The prosecutor from the Nakamura cartel case, the one who dismantled the Yamaguchi syndicate, among others." I nodded, keeping my tone even. "That's me." June's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "But you vanished." "No calls, no visits, nothing. I couldn't come back," I said, meeting his gaze. "Do you have any idea what happens to the families of prosecutors who target organized crime? Do you know what the Yamaguchi syndicate would have done to you, to Mom, if they knew we were connected?" Minho shook his head, disbelief etched into his features. "But you look so ordinary. Forgettable. That's by design," I replied. "For 15 years I've made sure I blended in. So no one would link me to my family, so the criminals I've put away wouldn't come after Mom or you for revenge." My phone buzzed again, a text from the FBI. "Takeda verdict. Guilty on all charges. Life without parole. Well done, counselor." I turned the screen toward Dr. Chen. "Doctor, about my mother's surgery." "I'm authorizing whatever gives her the best shot at recovery. Money's no issue. I'll also need her moved to a private room with round-the-clock security." "Security?" June asked, his voice faint, still reeling. "Old habits," I said, a wry smile tugging at my lips. 15 years of death threats will do that. I turned to face June and Minho fully, my voice steady but firm. "I couldn't tell you what I did, because knowing would have painted targets on your backs. I look rough because I just wrapped a 5-year case that forced me to live under a false identity, moving from safe house to safe house, always watching my back." Minho's voice broke as he found it again. "You're really a district attorney?" Senior district attorney, I corrected, with the highest conviction rate in the state. And as of today, nominated for federal prosecutor for the Northern District of California, I reached into my blazer and pulled out my badge, its weight familiar after 15 years. Mom didn't cry herself to sleep because she didn't know where I was. She knew exactly where I was and why I couldn't reach out. She couldn't tell you without putting you in danger. I slipped a hand into my pocket and retrieved a faded photograph, creased from years of being carried. It showed Mom and me at my law school graduation 18 years ago, her smile radiant. On the back, in her careful handwriting, my daughter, the prosecutor. So proud, even if it's a secret. June took the photo, his hands trembling as he studied it. She kept this? She had more, I said softly. Clippings from my cases, photos from my swearing in, even notes about the threats I faced. She knew every win, every promotion, every time I stared down a crime lord who'd slaughter entire families to make a point. She knew the cost of keeping you safe was letting you believe I'd abandoned you. I sat across from them, my voice softening further, though it carried the weight of years unspoken. Mom knew the daughter she raised was strong enough to give up everything, your trust, your love, to protect you. Dr. Chen cleared his throat, pulling us back to the present. About the surgery. Full authorization, I repeated. No expense spared. Coordinate her care through my office, and I'll need security protocols in place until we're certain there's no blowback from my recent cases. Minho stared at me, his expression one of someone seeing a stranger for the first time. All this time we thought, You thought I was the family's screw-up, I finished, my tone gentle but unyielding. I was, in truth, the family's protector, the one who stood in the shadows so they could live in the light. Rising from my chair, I smoothed the creases from my navy blazer, its plainness a deliberate choice to keep me invisible to those who might seek revenge. I need to get to the courthouse, I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of years spent commanding rooms far more hostile than this one. Sujin's right. I don't let defense attorneys question my authority. June reached out, his hand catching my arm as I moved toward the door. Hana, wait, he said, his voice cracking with a mix of regret and disbelief. We're so sorry. We didn't know. We thought... His words faltered, unable to bridge the gap between the sister he'd imagined and the woman standing before him. You weren't supposed to know, I replied, gently prying his hand free. That was the entire point. My silence kept you safe. My absence kept you alive. I met his gaze, letting the truth settle between us. June, the next time you're quick to judge someone's choices, pause. You might not have the full story, and sometimes the full story is bigger than you can imagine. As I reached the door, Minho's voice cut through the heavy silence. Why now, Hana? Why tell us after all this time? I turned, facing the two men who had spent the day tearing me apart with their words, oblivious to the fact that I'd spent 15 years dismantling enemies far more dangerous than their petty assumptions. Because Hiroshi Takeda was sentenced to life without parole this morning, I said, my tone even but unyielding. The last major threat to this family is gone, locked away forever. And because Mom deserves to have her children, both of her children, by her side when she wakes from surgery. My phone rang again, the secure line's sharp tone cutting through the room. I answered it without hesitation, right there in front of them. District Attorney Kim, I said, my voice crisp. Yes, Judge Nakamura. I'm on my way. No, the defense's challenge to my jurisdiction is baseless. I've been prosecuting organized crime since some of their attorneys were still in law school. I ended the call and looked at June and Minho one last time. That was a federal judge, I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips, the first genuine one I'd felt in years. He needs me to remind a defense team why their client will spend the rest of his life behind bars. As I stepped toward the exit, I heard June's breath catch, a quiet sob breaking free, not of sorrow, but of dawning understanding. The brother who'd written me off as a failure was beginning to see the truth. The sister he judged had spent 15 years crafting a legacy of justice, one conviction at a time. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Your mother is asking for Hana. She says she's proud of your latest victory. I smiled as I slipped into my car, not the sleek government-issued sedan I often used, but a nondescript rental, chosen to avoid drawing eyes. Some habits, forged in years of vigilance, were hard to break, even now. As I drove toward the courthouse, the place where I'd built my life, I felt a shift deep within me, like a fault line finally settling after years of pressure. For 15 years, I'd carried the dual burdens of my family's scorn and the relentless demands of protecting the public. I'd borne the weight of their disappointment, their assumptions that I was a drifter, a failure, a ghost who'd abandoned them. Now that weight was lifting, leaving only the responsibility that truly mattered, safeguarding those who couldn't protect themselves, including the family who never knew they needed me. The little girl who once staged mock trials with her stuffed animals had grown into a woman who commanded real courtrooms, her voice echoing through chambers where lives and futures hung in the balance. The daughter they believed had turned her back on them had, in truth, spent a decade and a half ensuring they could sleep soundly, free from the threats that haunted my every step. Tomorrow, I'd be sworn in as the federal prosecutor for the Northern District of California, a role that would dwarf even today's triumphs. Next month, I'd dive into cases that would make the Takeda verdict seem like a footnote. But tonight, I was just Hannah Kim, driving toward the courthouse where I belonged, unburdened at last by the misconceptions of those I loved most. Justice, I'd come to understand, wore many faces. Sometimes it was a guilty verdict, a criminal stripped of power. Sometimes it was quieter, more profound, a moment when the people who doubted you finally saw the truth of what you'd sacrificed for them. As I merged onto the highway, the city lights blurring past, I realized the gavel had fallen in ways that went beyond the courtroom. It had fallen on the lies my family had believed, on the distance that had separated us, and on the silence I'd kept to keep them safe.